Before we start this week's video, I'd like to thank everyone for watching these videos, and please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We're very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers here on this channel. It is our goal to reach that by the end of the year. Thank you all again for watching, and enjoy the video.
Welcome to Super Saturday, where we kick off our training shoes and get drunk. On tea, I'm Shifu Pain, and what's the first thing you think of when it comes to honor? Aside from overly brooding fire princes, one concept turned to most often when thinking about an honorable existence is a class of warriors known universally for their sense of culture, tradition, integrity, warfare, and the swords aren't too bad either, the samurai!
Samurai are a concept that have been around for a long time, longer than the European counterparts of knights. A lot of ideas and myths have been thrown around that have morphed and become indistinguishable from fiction, as heroic wandering people of war that help where needed, as nigh invincible creatures of war. Hell, I think the more striking idea is that the Japanese have managed to pull the wool over everyone's eyes for so long.
So today, let's get through this tangle of knots by taking a look at the history of the samurai. Does anyone have a pair of scissors?
Our tale begins all the way back in the 600s AD, during the Tang dynasty of China. At this time, Japan was considered less an independent country and more a vassal state of China. It was at this time, in 645, that a coup took place by the second son of the future emperor in a plot to kill a minister for now unknown reasons. A great deal of artifacts and documents were lost. Included in this was a chronicle of past events in Japan's history, leaving us with a Japanese dark age as to what exactly happened before then. Was also lost is knowledge about the relationship at the time between Japan and Korea. This came back in a big way when the Tang Emperor sought to conquer the Korean state of Bakji and conscripted Japan to do the deed. China was obviously under the impression that Japan was still loyal, but they were swiftly proven wrong. Even though at first it looked like the Japanese Emperor Kotoku was loyal, he reformed the government of Japan to make it more like China's, redrew boundaries, undermined local authorities to give the emperor more power over the country, and grew military districts. Soldiers and supplies were also moved to the southwestern border, specifically to the island of Kyushu, which would be a perfect takeoff ground to assault Korea. But in truth, Kotoku deployed these men as border guards or Sokimari, with the plan to defend Japan when China found out and sought retribution for disobeying orders.
Let's take a look at the deployment order for these guards. They were asked to bring with them
a sword, armor, a bow, arrows, a war drum, and flag.
Sure, this all sounds like typical samurai gear and weaponry, but the armor they probably used was a lot closer to Chinese weaponry and armor, seeing as how they had only just defected from the Chinese. There is also the fact that they were not asked to bring any horses with them, and horses are a major part of samurai strategy. Also, the sword most likely used was not the traditional katana. It was more likely to be the Chinese straight sword, again because of the recent defection.
Kotoku most likely hoped for the Tang dynasty to dissolve before this, however. The dynasty was nearing its end of the dynastic average lifespan, with the previous dynasty only lasting 40 years. Kotoku would therefore only need to watch as the country dissolved into civil war over the transition of power and not give a hoot about its borders. This did not happen, however, and China partnered with the Korean kingdom of Sia to conquer Baekje in 660. A call for help went out to Japan, who responded with a military response, one that was strong enough to require the emperor moving to Kyushu. The empress of the time, Seimi, passed away during the preparations, leaving her son to finish the campaign. This actually led to a serious defeat for the Japanese fleet, with the fleet sailing from Tsushima to the Baek River. The fleet encountered only a small fleet of Chinese ships, with the Japanese ships being sandwiched and not being able to move. Losses were estimated to be in the 10,000s.
That's cool and all, but wasn't this video about the samurai? We're getting there.
Emperor Tenji was sworn in 668 and moved the capital again, this time from Azuku to Omi. The land the palace was erected on had mountains on 3 sides and a river on the 4th, creating an easy fortification for the palace. Tenji seemed to have defense and war in mind, having courtiers carry arms to the point of it being commonplace to see nobles with swords at their hip or a bow on their person. Beacon guards were also established, as well as more border guards in the southwest and outlying islands, mostly at Tsushima and Iki. key. Tenji was fully expecting Chinese retaliation and was continually prepared for defending Japan, also fortifying Hakata Bay in Kyushu, as well as having siege sites on the inland sea. Tenji's reign was also the time for the first Japanese census in preparation for military conscription. It was over the years that the infrastructure of Japan's government developed, establishing a ministry of bureaucrats with a line of 12 civil servants. The lower 6 were referred to as servants, or...
Do you need a minute? Are you sitting comfortably? Do you have a good... See, maybe you need a drink? You gone to the toilet? You're all good? Okay. Samurai! This was a term referring to lower rank officials and bureaucrats, but it's interesting that this is the term that was later used to refer to warriors. It just shows what the thought was for warriors in the Japanese pecking order.
It was in 672 that the second son of Tenji, Omeyo, remember? That guy that did the killing of that minister? Anyway, he fought in a civil war with Proto-Armour and won, becoming emperor. This month-long war involved tactics including the use of horsemen, as well as the splitting of the army into units of archers, infantry, and cavalry, along with the use of drums and gongs to send messages and orders to each unit. New additions to the army on Omeyo's side included spears and polearms that had a beak-like tip, along with a distinct bow unique to Japan, with the grip closer to the lower end of the bow, differing from the recurved bow used by China's forces at the time. What was shifting into the army was what could be called proto-armor for the typical samurai, with plates of armor made of either iron or hardened leather lacquered to better last. These plates were lashed together around the torso, with helmets that had a similar plating around the neck. A shirt of armor was also worn, but more so by horsemen than by foot soldiers. When Oemo won, he was crowned Emperor Temu, and immediately began to shift the culture. For one, he had his son be one of the chief editors of the Chronicles of Japan, or Nihongi, a text that replaced the old chronicles, as well as a mythologizing of the position of emperor, stating that the emperor was descended from the gods rather than just a job that people do.
Well, he sounds like a real humble guy.
Having grown up in war, Temu was constantly on the guard, with his court in Osaka being nothing but tournaments, inspections, and training, determined to also not be dethroned in the same way he had gained power. Temu began confiscating all weapons and military arms from private hands, having them kept in district vaults to await use. Court appointees were also placed in districts to maintain order, keep registers, and by the 8th century, this system was in place enough to have significant militia levied from civilians. These civilians, however, would be expected to bring their own sword, dagger, helmet, bow, and arrows, with this system meaning that at least one member of the household will be required to enlist, and the rich immediately gained a better military position. And if you had a horse, you were just an instant cavalryman.
It's like chia pets! You add water, boom! Instant privilege!
With the poor being kept as border guards.
I refer you to my previous joke.
While war was frequent in the north, mostly with a tribe known as the Emishi, southwestern Japan faced very little action as any threat from China or Korea never came. The old conscripting system began to dissolve, leaving a significant void that was filled by professional warriors. In the north, warfare changed as indoctrinated Emishi began to fight with the Japanese and lent their strategies to the cause, thereby requiring frontline command rather than distanced and passive generals. This really hit home in 778 at the Kuromo River, where 2,000 members of the Japanese army chased down Eteri, the head of the Emishi army, initially outnumbering his forces, but when reinforcements came in and surrounded the 2,000 forces, calling it a bloodbath would be a kindness. Only 25 men died in the official battle, but that's only because most men simply ran for their lives and proceeded to drown in the river, leaving 1,000 more dead while the rest swam to the opposing shore, leaving behind all their weapons and equipment. This embarrassing defeat caused Emperor Kamu to realize that the system of having generals give orders from distant fortresses rather than on the front lines was not working, and sent in another general to clean up the army's act. Sakanoue no Tamoamo, a man often described in texts as a demon rather than a general, using trickery and Emishi tactics against them, most notably the strategy of running into battle and then swiftly retreating, chipping away defenses along with mountain archers on horseback, who found it difficult to have a great field of fire more to the left-hand side and not being able to quickly shift sides. They were therefore forced to move and fire quickly and consider other soldiers to not accidentally hit them or be hit by them. A curved longsword used by the Emishi was also adopted by veterans of this conflict, and this sort of sword evolved over the years and became the modern katana. Iron-plated armor was also discontinued, preferring hardened leather which would not corrode, was more durable and easier to mass produce. The design also changed to have a wider neck armoring to have more protection. Not being able to carry shields and fire arrows, shield-like plating was added to the shoulders. Something which faded out quickly from warfare was the crossbow. To put it simply, as a holdover from the Chino-Korea conflict, the craft of manufacturing and maintaining the weapon was dying out as archery became more prevalent, with the crossbow being a rarity by the 9th century, and by 914 it was remarked as only being a nostalgic relic. When we get to the 11th century, this was a time for courtly romance, politics, and casual rape. Warriors outside of the capital were employed to maintain order in villages, but were considered by those in the capital to be animalistic, uncultured brutes.
Seems kind of rude, I'm not gonna lie.
Warriors inside the capital, on the other hand, considered themselves as better educated, finely cultured men of principle, and as soft praise, or just ego-stroking, courtiers began to refer to them as samurai. Emperor Saga, realizing that the imperial family was just too big and a drain on the economy, decided to streamline things a bit, and basically cut off 32 of his siblings. These members, still with some wealth and accruing capital, formed their own clans and subsumed others to grow in influence. The most prevalent out of these were the clans of Taira and Minamoto. 1192 saw the emergence of the shogunate. The shogunate began as a form of feudal system, with the emperor at the top, the shogunate maintaining control over the military, the samurai underneath that, and civilians at the bottom.
Typical.
As time went on, the military mights of the shogunate caused a pulling of power, basically making the emperor a figurehead while the shogun had the real power.
If you need help visualizing it, just think Ba Sing Se.
The first shogunate was Minamoto Yoritomo, gaining military power in 1185 after the TLDR being a civil war with the Taira. Established in Kamakura, the imperial government still held power, but the shogunate maintained control of the samurai. Yoritomo established a network of governors or shugo overseeing states and with stewards overseeing estates. This was the period where the need for warriors shrank, and culture and ceremony became more prevalent. This was the period where staples such as the tea ceremony became synonymous with the samurai. The Kamakura shogunate fell apart in 1333, which led to the Ashikaga shogunate taking over from 1338 to 1573, with the shogun capital moving to Kyoto. However, as the shogun grew more and more independent, the need to listen to the shogunate shrank, and soon the now daimyo overtook the Ashikaga shogunate. 1600 witnessed the dominance of the daimyo by Takagawa Ieyasu, who saw in the Takagawa shogunate in Edo, now known as Tokyo. The Takagawa was the shogunate that controlled the emperor, as well as the daimyo, religious establishments, foreign affairs, and Takagawa land. The samurai of this time were made a closed caste, in an effort to freeze the social hierarchy and establish some sense of peace, which was still hampered slightly because by this point the samurai were basically relics of war that were hanging around, getting drunk on sake, and making trouble during peacetime. In an effort to calm them down, samurai were required to finally get jobs in courtly politics or in trade.
They were still allowed to wear their katana and wakizashi, but the message was clear. We don't need you anymore.
Finally, it was the Meiji Restoration that saw the end of the shogunate, along with the end of feudalism in 1871. The samurai accounted for about 10% of the population, and were a load of wealthy relics that swiftly lost their status and their wealth.
With all of that being said, and to justify this video's runtime, what can we take away from this?
The samurai were a class of warriors that started as a pushback against larger outside forces, grew in wealth and industry, learned from their failures, and gradually improved with each passing conflict, but eventually crashed down under its own ego and self-decided importance. I couldn't fit it in, but that's what Bushido was, another way to keep samurai in line before it was mixed with Confucianism and European chivalry.
Maybe it's also a good cautionary tale for the dangers of pride and arrogance. Just to be safe, remember kids, when it comes to the facts of life, don't be an ass. Thank you for watching this week's video, and in the comment section let me know if you would like to see a part 2 to this video, because there was just so much research for this video that I just couldn't fit in. So let me know if you want to see part 2. And until next time everyone, peace be with you.